guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome if you're new here. Hey, my name is Lo and my husband and I are working on paying off six-figure student loan debt. I make personal finance videos here on my channel talking about our family's journey to pay off our debt, budget, save for retirement, and just get our financial life in order generally. In this video, I'm going to give you an in-depth tutorial on how to use my budget spreadsheet. If you are watching this video because you purchased my spreadsheet, then thank you so much for your purchase. I really appreciate it. And if you're watching this video and you haven't purchased it, the link to my Etsy shop will be in the description for the video. The spreadsheet is an instant download to Google Sheets and it has a monthly budget template for either net or gross income, and it also comes with an annual budget template for both net and gross income. So let's get right to it and start the tutorial. All right, this is what the spreadsheet will look like when you first open it, and it'll be slightly different depending on whether you open the net budget spreadsheet or the gross budget spreadsheet. You get both when you purchase the budget kit. So if you get the gross one, it will look like this, and it'll have this extra section here called taxes and insurance, but otherwise, if you get the net one, it'll have all the same sections minus that taxes section. So I'm just going to go over a few formatting things with you, and then I'm going to get into an example with numbers and labels so you can see what it looks like when this is filled out. As of the time I'm posting this tutorial, I plan to do monthly budget with me videos. So if you are new to budgeting and not super comfortable with spreadsheets, I'd highly recommend you watch those videos because that will be a good real life example of how I use this budget spreadsheet each month. So for the income, it's pretty self-explanatory. You want to just put all your income sources. If you need more rows, you just want to right click and hit insert row, and that will add more rows. And if you have too many rows here and it bothers you just having these blank spaces, you can leave them if you want. If you have two income sources, let's say, you can leave those blank spaces there, or you can hide the rows. So if you want to hide the rows, you would just highlight the rows that you don't need, right click over here and hit hide rows, and that would hide those rows. I wouldn't suggest deleting rows. I would just hide them just to make sure it doesn't mess up any of the formulas. You will see that if you hide rows in any of these sections, it will make this section smaller. So if you need more room for expenses, then you may not want to hide rows. But I suggest setting up the income, pay yourself first, and debt sections first so you can, adjust the rows as you need, and then the fixed expenses, you do second, so none of those lines will get hidden as you're adding things. So set up this side first, and then move on to this section, and then last, set up your sinking funds. So if you need additional rows, if you're ever adding rows in a section, make sure you do it in the middle of the section. Don't put it at the bottom or the very top, just to make sure that it gets included in the formula. So after you've entered your income, your savings, your debts, and your fixed expenses, you want to move on to the sinking funds. For the sinking funds, you'll see in the example in just a second what you might want to include in sinking funds, but similar to above, if you need additional rows for sinking funds, then you just click somewhere in the middle of the section, right click and hit insert row to include additional sinking funds. Now, anytime you insert a row, you want to make sure that you drag down any formulas. So see how there's nothing right here? You want to go up to the formula above it, make your cursor a plus, and drag it down. See how that cursor was a plus sign when I did that? I'll do it one more time. See this little box right here? Your cursor will turn into a plus and you just drag it down. And same thing goes for up here. If you add any rows, see how there's no formula here, you need to pull this down, and that's going to make sure everything totals correctly. Okay, so that is it for the formatting. So let's go to the example. All right, so this is not necessarily a realistic example. I just put in, somewhat random numbers just to give you guys some numbers to look at. But this example, there are 4 sources of income and a miscellaneous income source. I would actually put, like on our budget, it says like J income and L income for me and my husband, to designate whose paychecks are what. Moving on to the pay yourself first. In this example, there's 2 Roth IRAs that this family is contributing to, a brokerage account, an emergency fund, and a 529 college savings account. Now, you'll note that here there's an emergency fund, but also here there's an emergency fund. And what's the difference between those two? I will explain the difference between these two at a later point in the tutorial, but I'm not going to get into it right now, just so I can keep going in order that makes sense. Next, you have your debt section. So in this example, there's a couple credit cards, a car loan, a student loan, and then a place for extra debt payments because they're trying to pay extra towards debt and you can put it designated separate, or you don't have to do that. You could just hide this row if you didn't need that, and if you had an extra $25, you could change this to $125 instead of $100. So you'll have to play around with this and use it in a way that makes sense for you. Now you'll notice that there's no mortgage in this section. It's mortgage/rent over here. That's how I do it in my budget. We do have a mortgage, we don't pay rent, but if we didn't have a mortgage, it would mean that we were renting. So I don't like putting the mortgage in the debt section. That's just a personal preference. You certainly can put your mortgage in the debt section if that makes sense for you. Over here in the fixed expenses section, the way that I like to do it is I put any expenses that are literally fixed, that I know ahead of time before the month starts how much money I am going to need for each expense. It doesn't really fluctuate. So in this example, mortgage or rent, that's typically a set amount. Life insurance, typically a set amount. Internet, cell phone, car insurance, subscriptions. Besides this unexpected, which I just like to put over in this section rather than in my sinking funds, everything in this section would typically be a fixed expense that you know 100% ahead of time at the beginning of the month how much that bill is going to be for the month. So you'll notice in the spreadsheet that there's no section for variable expenses, and that is because I don't like putting variable expenses in their own section. I like doing them as sinking funds. And that's how the spreadsheet is intended to be used. If you like putting variable expenses not in your sinking funds and you like having them in a different section, you can change this to fixed and variable expenses and put your variable expenses in this section here. But I'll show you what I like to do with my variable expenses and how I combine them with my sinking funds. So over here is where the variable expenses and sinking funds go. So the examples here are mini emergency fund, and again, I'll get into the difference between these two in just a second. Groceries, it's a variable expense. It doesn't have to be a sinking fund. But I've found when you go over or under on an expense because it's variable, it makes it easier if it's a sinking fund, because then you're not scrambling at the last minute at the end of the month to make your budget zero out for the month. And I'll explain that further in a second, but let me just get through the rest of these categories. So we've got, for example, a vacation fund, some personal spending money, child expenses, pet expenses, gas, gifts, car maintenance, house maintenance, utilities, and Christmas. So, some people, their utility bill is a fixed amount. They have it set every single month. And so you may not want utilities in the sinking funds. You may want to move it over to the fixed expenses if that makes sense for you. So as you work with the spreadsheet more, you'll play around with it and see what works for you. But I'm showing you guys exactly how we do it because that's what makes sense for us. And if you don't really have a system and you're looking to adopt a system that works, I'm showing you guys our system. So this spreadsheet assumes that you do sinking funds. So how this spreadsheet works is on the first of the month, the total right here, see how it says starting balance from prior month ending? So the total of all your sinking funds on the first of the month should be equal to the amount of money that is in your bank account on the first of the month. And if you hold your sinking funds in multiple different accounts, then you're going to have to total it up. We do our budget from one bank account because the way this is set up, it's just easier if everything is in one checking account and then any other money is separate in different accounts. But if you have, for example, some sinking funds in one account and then you've got another checking account that you budget from, you're going to want to total those up for purposes of this budget. So depending on whether you do sinking funds already or not, it will impact how much you have to start in each sinking fund. If you've never done sinking funds before and you're just starting, then probably most of these will have a zero balance to start. And whatever balance is in your checking account on the first of the month is what you will put in here for your starting balance in the mini emergency fund, which is your checking account buffer. So typically on the first of the month, you don't have zero in your checking account. You have something in there. And for us, to start out when we were working on improving our budgeting, we didn't have much extra in there. It was usually around $1,000 to $2,000. And so let's say right now, the first of the month, you have $1,500 in your checking account. What I'd recommend you do in the spreadsheet is you just put that $1,500 as your mini emergency fund, which is your checking account buffer. So whatever's in your checking account on the first of the month, it may be less than that, and maybe more than that. If it's not already allocated to sinking funds in some way, in the way you're budgeting already, then put it as your mini emergency fund. If you have sinking funds and you have categories that you have already allocated money to, go ahead and put in those balances. Maybe you've got $50 in a grocery fund and $100 in your child expense fund or whatever categories you use, and so on and so forth. The reason why it's important to just use one account or to make sure all the money in all of your accounts that you're using to pay your bills during the month is in the sinking funds is because of this section right here. So this is how you know whether your budget is balanced or not. So let's just start entering some numbers because it's going to make a lot more sense when you start seeing numbers go in. So in the spreadsheet, there is a budgeted column and an actual column for each section: income, pay yourself first, debt, sinking funds, and fixed expenses. Over here, the budgeted column and the actual column are over here. But for all the other sections, they are right here. So when you set up your budget for the month, you want to put what you expect your income to be and what you expect your expenses to be in the budgeted columns. So all right here where all the numbers are already entered, and over here are where we have already budgeted for the month. Now you'll see here that it says left to budget is 0. So let's delete out a couple numbers and see what happens. So I just deleted out a few numbers and you can see what happened. It shows that we have $650 left to budget. And that's because when you enter your income for the month, it shows, how much you have left to budget as what your total income is. And then as you budget different expenses in the sinking funds, debt, pay yourself first, and fixed expenses, that left to budget amount will go down. So as we fill in the pay yourself first section, you see that left to budget amount going down. Okay, so at the beginning of the month, when you're starting your month and you've put in your income and you've put in all your expenses, you want that left to budget number to be 0 because this is a zero-based budget. You want all of your income to be allocated to a certain expense. So let's pretend the month has started and we're actually getting into it. Okay, so we've got some income that's come in. We got $1,800. You can see now that it says left to spend actual is $1,800 because we've actually received $1,800 and we haven't paid any bills yet. But then let's say we pay our rent because it's due on the 1st. Then you can see it over here, the left to spend actual goes down, and now we only have $850 left to spend of the money we actually made this month. Then let's say we get some more income, $325 over here. Now it went up by that exact amount. But then we make our credit card payments, so then it goes down. So you can see that, as your income comes in and as you make payments, you can see how much there is left to spend. Now for your sinking funds, it's a little bit different. And if you're not used to doing a spreadsheet for sinking funds, you're used to using cash, this is exactly like your cash envelopes. So what I usually do at the beginning of the month after I finish budgeting is I just copy this over to the actual column as if that's the actual amount I'm spending. And you'll see if you haven't received your income yet for the month, this is going to go negative. But as you get all your income in throughout the month, that amount will balance out. It's just showing that you actually spent money that you haven't spent yet. Because if you put $600 in a grocery fund, but you haven't spent any money on groceries, you're not actually out $600. You just allocated $600 to that cash envelope or that sinking fund. When you spend money from your sinking funds, you put it in this section. So again, if you've done cash envelopes, when you take cash out of that envelope, that means that you have spent money that was in that fund. Well, this is exactly the same. So it's just a digital cash envelope. So you have $600 in your grocery digital cash envelope. You go to the grocery store and you spend $200, and you can see here your ending balance is now $400. You had $0 in the fund at the beginning of the month. You added $600, you spent $200, and now you have $400 left in that fund. And then let's say later in the month you spend another $200. I like to do it this way. You put an equal sign and then you add $200 and you see you spent $400 and then you have $200 left to spend for the month. The other thing that I like to do is I like to right click and hit insert note. So let's say on 7/2 I went to groceries and I spent $200, and then on 7/20 I went to the grocery store and I spent $200. That way you can see how that amount breaks down based on the date. So if you ever want to go back and like match things with your bank statement or double check something, you think you forgot to enter something, then you can see the detailed breakdown. And also, if you're just like, how did I spend so much money? What did I end up spending it on? Like, where did I go? You know, let's say on 7/21, we then went to McDonald's or something because you're putting that in the grocery section. That's what we do. We put takeout in our grocery section too. Then you can see, oh yeah, I forgot we went to McDonald's, and that's why there's, you know, extra money spent out of this fund. Okay, so I promised I would explain the difference between these two emergency funds. So this is the emergency fund in your main checking account or accounts that you are holding all of your sinking funds. If you have a separate savings account that you're not using for your budget, and you don't put it in this sinking fund section, and you don't want to have to add it in every single month to your sinking funds and have it as a line item, then you can put it up here, because this is money that's coming out of your main checking account or accounts that is not being included in your sinking funds, but you still have to account for. So let's say you have a checking account buffer of $1,500 and that's enough for you. You don't want more in there. And then let's say you have a high yield savings account where you keep your emergency fund. You would want to put your high yield savings account emergency fund contributions up here, because that $100 is coming out of your bank account. It's not sitting in any of these sinking funds. It's actually coming out of your bank account. Same thing with, you know, retirement contributions. Those are coming out of your bank account, and it's like you're paying a bill. They're not there anymore in your checking account to be used for anything else. So we keep part of our emergency fund in a high yield savings account, and we keep part of our emergency fund in a mini emergency fund, which is our checking account buffer, that's all in one account with all the rest of these sinking funds. So that's the other thing, is we use one checking account for all of our sinking funds. We use one checking account actually for this entire budget. It comes out of one account. So we have one main checking account where we pay all our bills, we do all our expenses, and everything comes out of one place. And it just keeps it really, really clean and easy. Okay, so let's pretend it's the end of the month and we have paid all the things that we were going to pay. And I will show you guys here what happens if you go over or under budget. So let's say here that we had budgeted $50 for unexpected, but it was actually $100, and we had budgeted $75 for cell phone, but our cell phone bill actually went up to $100 this month, and that's what's going to be going forward. So we are over budget by $75, and you can see there's this difference column between the actual and the budgeted. You can see how much over you are in any of the categories and in total. So we're over by $75. You can see here, left to spend actual, we are negative $75. So we need to straighten that out before we can close out our budget for the month. So there's a couple ways to do this. One is, if we know that this is happening and we've noticed, because we're doing our budget, updates regularly, like once a week or so, then you may say, hey, we're not going to have this $100 to put towards our emergency fund this month. And you say, we're just going to put $25, and you catch it early. And that way your left to spend actual is balanced at the end of the month. But let's say you don't catch it. Let's say you already put the money into the emergency fund that's in your high yield savings account or just another account, and you don't want to undo that transfer. You want to fix it some other way. So the other option is to take some of these sinking funds and contribute less money. So let's put in some amounts here. So let's say we spent these different amounts from our sinking funds. You can see, well, we didn't spend all our grocery money, and we didn't spend the house maintenance money or the utility money. Well, the utility money, if you're budgeting $100, it's because you think on average throughout the year, you're going to need $100 a month for utilities. So just because it was $50 this month doesn't mean you're not going to need that $50 later. So you could, reduce this down to $50, and that would, get you closer to where you want to be. You would only be short $25 then. But then you're going to have to make that money up another month. So you'll have to, use your judgment on that. But let's say we only spent $500 on groceries this month and we had budgeted $600. You can bump this down to $525, and then you see your left to spend actual is balanced, and you still have an extra $25 in your grocery budget. Now, it doesn't always work out so nicely like that, because let's say you budgeted $600 and you actually spent $650. Now you're negative $50 in this fund, and you don't have extra from this fund to pull from. So then maybe you bump this Christmas fund down to 25, and you know that you're getting a little bit behind on your Christmas savings. So you have to play around with it and see what works for you based on whether you go over budget, or if you're under budget, obviously that's a good problem to have, and you can decide to put more money into a sinking fund, or bump up your contribution to one of your savings goals to a higher amount or something like that. But working with these budgets, it's a work in progress, and every single month I've done our budgeting, I've gotten better and better at it. And so, what I would suggest is play around with it, see what works for you. But also, if it doesn't work out perfectly, don't just give up on it. Keep going and try again the next month, and try again until you get it down, because this stuff takes practice to get really good at. Just like anything that's hard, budgeting is hard. So just keep at it. All right. So the other thing I wanted to mention is, if you're using the system that we use where all of your money is in one account and you have some sort of mini emergency fund that's a checking account buffer, it's okay if one of your sinking funds goes negative, because there's going to be other money in the account that will be able to balance it. This ending balance, let's say it's the last day of the month, this ending balance here should be the amount that is actually in your checking account at the end of the month. And so even though we've got, a negative number here, when you add up that with these other amounts, you have a positive number overall. One more thing to point out about the sinking fund section, you'll see there is this thing that says goal and due date. So if there is a goal that you have, like let's say your goal is to get $5,000 in for your checking account buffer, then you can put $5,000 in there, so okay, we ended at $1,600, we're trying to get to $5,000, so you want to keep contributing to that fund. Other funds may be funds that you basically spend down every month, so you're just trying to stay on budget. So for groceries, let's say your budget is, you want to stay at $600 a month. So you can put that in there. And then for other goals, there may be an actual due date. So for example, Christmas. Let's say you want to save $1,000 for Christmas. And so that is due on Christmas. So you can put that due date in there. Or let's say, you have a vacation coming up and you need $2,500 for the vacation, and the vacation is scheduled for a certain date. Then you can kind of see where you're at. Oops, we forgot to start contributing to our vacation fund. We've got a vacation coming up in X number of months. So you can then work backwards and see how much you're going to need to be contributing each month to get to your goal on time. The other thing that I wanted to point out to you is this right here. So this is how you check throughout the month to see if you are balanced and you've been entering all of the numbers from your online banking for your bank account that you use for your budgeting into the spreadsheet correctly. So let me delete out a couple just to show you. So at any given point in the month, let's say you've paid most of your bills, but there's a couple things you haven't paid, these ones, one of them over here, and you update your budget. What you want to do is look at the actual ending balance from your bank account, and let's say it says $2,300. You have $2,300 in your bank account, and you put that in here, you'll see, okay, there's a difference of $25. So I've entered in all the bills we've paid, and I've entered in all the amounts we spent from our sinking funds, but it's off by $25. So every time I go in and I update my spreadsheet throughout the month, I always put my actual ending balance from my bank account into this box after I've entered all the numbers up to the current date for that month, and see where are we at. Am I balanced or not? If you guys know about the concept of balancing a checkbook, that's kind of what this is meant to be. It's meant to balance your spreadsheet against your actual bank account balance, so you can make sure that you didn't miss any numbers. The other thing I will point out, which is a really fun feature, my favorite feature of the spreadsheet, but you don't need to actually do anything actively to make it work, is these summary graphs that show where your money is going throughout the month. So when you do your budgeting, this circle will show up with the different categories and tell you what % of each category you're contributing to for that month. And then as you enter your actual numbers numbers throughout the month, it will also fill up. So you'll see, okay, we meant to send 13% to debt. We only ended up sending 2% to debt. You can see the difference between how you budgeted and what you actually paid. So that brings up another good point. The way I do it is I budget by the first of the month. I fill out, this column and this column with the numbers I expect for the month, and then I don't touch it again. Even if, something changes, we decide, we're not going to be able to put money into our Roth IRA here because we're going to put an extra $200 to groceries this month, and so we need to balance it somehow, or whatever the case is. I only make those adjustments in the actual section, and I do that because it's a good way to gauge how accurately you are budgeting when you set up your budget in the month. If you make a change and you say, I'm only putting, we're not putting anything in our Roth IRA, and then you go back and you change this column, then you're not really getting a good sense of how good of a job you're doing in estimating everything. And also the budgeted columns are your ideal allocation for your money. And so if you're not able to accomplish that, I feel like it's a good way to check yourself and again, and say, okay, we wanted to pay ourselves 16.6% this month, and we only paid ourselves first 13.3%. So it keeps track of what you intended to do and what you actually did. And maybe there's some patterns on what's happening, that you're meeting all your pay yourself first goals, but you're not meeting your debt goals, or your fixed expenses are always going over and something you're not, you're getting some of these numbers wrong. Each month you forgot your car insurance changed to a higher number, or whatever the case may be. So I don't like to touch these budgeted columns after I've set my budget for the month. I just leave them, even if, a few days in I see they're inaccurate. I just go off of making those adjustments in the actual columns. So you've done your first budget for the month, you're done. What you want to do is go down to this tab down here, and you want to hit duplicate, and that way you can already have all your correct categories and formatting and everything, and you just, you fill in the month. So I forgot to say that before, but you fill in the month, whatever month you're in, and that way you just want to delete out all the actual numbers, but then you don't have to reformat everything and you're good to go. But make sure you do delete everything out. You also should go down here and rename the tab. So whatever month you're in now, you can rename that tab. So each time you open a new month, you can look quickly and see what months you're looking at. And then finally, what you'll need to do is you'll need to take the ending balance of all of your sinking funds from the prior month, and you'll want to enter those numbers into the starting balance for the sinking funds for the new month. And then also I just want to point out this projected annual net budget. I'd highly recommend you do this depending on what time of the year you get this budget template. You may not want to do the whole year. You may just want to do, whatever the remainder of the year is. But when we started doing this helped us a lot more than I thought it would. And it's just at the end of the year, you kind of predict what your income's going to be. You predict all the amounts that you think you're going to be able to pay to things, and that's a good way to be able to then set goals for the year, because if you can estimate what your income is and estimate what your expenses are, then you can also say, hey, we're only going to be able to put this amount towards debt or savings or whatever, and see if you're happy with that. See if that's going to make you feel good at the end of the year. And so going into it, you kind of see the overall picture. So here's an example of what it looks like filled out. If you've got total income of $47,000, you're putting $7,800 to retirement, you're putting $6,300 to debt payments, $15,000 to fixed expenses, and $17,000 to sinking funds. And you can set goals for some of your sinking funds, like, vacation fund. Here there's only $300. Is that how much you need for vacation, or should that be $3,000? You can get a better sense of how your money's going to work overall throughout the year. And then finally, if you are doing the gross budget, I just wanted to point out for the taxes and insurance section, you're going to have to look at your pay stub every month. In the income, you're going to want to put your gross, not your net. So you're going to want to put what actually was paid to you on your pay stub, not just what hits your bank account. And then you put all the deductions in this section. So I've got taxes, insurance, flex spending account, and other. There may be other categories for you. It just depends. You can adjust that. Those are just examples of things you might have that come out of your paycheck. And then the other thing I want to point out is if you are using the gross budget template, then any 401k contributions or
HSA contributions or any other sort of like savings, retirement, investments that come out of your paycheck, you then put in this pay yourself first category. So it gives you a much more accurate picture of how much you're putting towards your savings goals than if you're just using your net paycheck and you have 401k contributions coming out of your paycheck, for example, because those wouldn't be accounted for if you were just using the net budget spreadsheet.
So that is it for today's tutorial. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you want to see more about how I use this budget, then I do post monthly budget with me videos, so you can find those here on my channel. If you have any questions about how the spreadsheet works, you can either comment on this video or message me on Etsy, or you can email me directly, and my email is also in the description for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you soon in my next video. Bye.